When we ask whether religions are evolving for the modern world, we're really asking whether ancient systems of belief, created in small tribal communities thousands of years ago, can still survive in a time of global science, technology, and rapid cultural change. Religions have always claimed permanence, eternal truth, unchanging divine wisdom. Yet history shows they have shifted, rebranded, and reinvented themselves whenever survival demanded it. The question is not whether they evolve, but how and at what cost to truth and honesty. Take Christianity. In its earliest form, it was a small apocalyptic cult, expecting the world to end within the lifetime of its first followers. When that didn't happen, the message was reshaped into a timeless doctrine of salvation. By the Middle Ages, it had become a political empire, complete with kings, armies, and wealth. Then, during the Enlightenment, it faced challenges from reason and science, forcing new interpretation. And today, churches attempt to present themselves as centers of community, charity, or even progressive values. That is not timeless truth. That is adaptation. The same pattern is visible in Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and almost every other tradition. They all carry the mark of reinvention. New doctrines, new rituals, and new interpretations arise whenever old versions become too difficult to defend in light of evidence or shifting cultural norms. Consider the growing acceptance of LGBTQ rights. Only a few decades ago, most religious leaders openly condemned same-sex relationships as sinful. Today, some churches wave rainbow flags, some temples conduct same-sex marriages, and even within Islam, movements exist to reinterpret scripture in more inclusive ways. This is framed as compassion, but at its core, it is adaptation to cultural pressure. As if these texts were truly divine and eternal, they would not need reinterpretation, and science has forced similar adjustments. The Catholic Church once condemned heliocentrism. Now it teaches astronomy in its schools. Creation myths once claimed the universe was a few thousand years old. Now religious institutions try to reconcile their stories with the Big Bang and evolution. Some even argue that ancient scripture mysteriously predicted modern discovery, which is another way of rewriting old myths to fit new knowledge. This flexibility may look like growth, but it also reveals fragility. It shows that religions are not guiding human progress, but trailing behind it, adjusting only when the pressure becomes unbearable. In other words, they are reactive, not proactive. Psychology also plays a role here. Human minds are wired to seek certainty, belonging, and purpose. Religion once provided that in a world where little was understood. Today, science and secular systems provide clear answers. Yet many still cling to religious frameworks. To keep their grip, religions evolve by borrowing the language of psychology, wellness, and community. Churches market themselves as places for healing and mindfulness. Temples present meditation as a form of therapy rather than devotion. Mosques highlight social justice and charity more than dogma. These are strategies to remain relevant in a world where blind faith no longer sells as easily. Sociologically, this constant adaptation exposes the business-like nature of religion. Institutions survive not by preserving an original truth, but by reshaping their product to match consumer demand. If the demand is for strict traditionalism, you get fundamentalist branches. If the demand is for open-minded spirituality, you get liberal denominations. Religion becomes less about eternal truth and more about market survival. We also see religion evolving through technology, live stream services, apps that send daily prayers, virtual reality pilgrimages, AI-driven chatbots that explain scripture. At first glance, this looks like modernization, but it also shows that the form is being updated while the content remains ancient, wrapping outdated ideas in shiny packaging. This raises another question. Are religions evolving in a way that truly makes them more compatible with modern life, or are they simply disguising themselves so they don't look obsolete? Because when a church embraces equality in one area, but still clings to outdated dogma in another, the evolution is superficial, not genuine. There's also the global perspective. In some countries, religion is losing ground so quickly that leaders scramble to soften doctrines and appear progressive. In others, where religion still controls politics, leaders double down on fundamentalism.
The contrast itself reveals that religion doesn't evolve by divine guidance. It evolves by necessity, shaped by culture, politics, and survival instincts. Even morality, often claimed as the sacred domain of religion, has been reshaped. Ancient scriptures allowed slavery, treated women as property, and demanded brutal punishments. Today, almost all religions publicly denounce slavery, support basic human rights, and soften their stances on gender equality, not because their holy text changed, but because society demanded it. What is called religious morality is, in reality, human morality, filtering through religious institutions until they are forced to adapt. And yet there is always a limit to how far these systems can evolve. A religion tied to ancient texts and divine authority cannot fully detach from its foundations without losing its identity. So, while religions attempt to modernize, they always carry contradictions. They present themselves as both ancient and new, timeless and evolving, rigid and flexible. That tension may keep them alive for now, but it also undermines their credibility. This contradiction becomes most obvious when religions confront questions that cannot be easily softened. Topics like eternal punishment, miracles, or divine authority, these are harder to reshape without tearing at the very core of the belief system. And some leaders try to reinterpret hell as a state of mind rather than a place of fire. Others redefine miracles as poetic metaphors rather than literal events. But every reinterpretation raises the same problem. If the old understanding was wrong, why should the new one be trusted? That problem runs deep in all attempts to modernize faith. If a religion once insisted that the earth was flat or that disease was caused by sin, and now it claims otherwise, what stops it from being wrong again tomorrow? The very act of evolution undermines the claim of eternal truth. It reveals that the religion was not a source of knowledge, but a reflection of ignorance slowly corrected by outside forces. Consider the rise of prosperity gospel churches. They market wealth and success as signs of divine favor. This could never have taken root in the poverty-stricken world where Christianity began, but in consumer-driven economies, it flourishes. The message has evolved to fit modern materialism, even though it contradicts the humility and poverty once praised in Scripture. That's not divine adaptation, it's opportunism. Another example lies in Buddhism, often presented in the West as a philosophy of peace, mindfulness, and meditation. Yet historically, Buddhist societies have included strict hierarchies, rituals, and even violent conflict. In Japan during World War II, Buddhist leaders supported militarism. Today, Western Buddhists emphasize meditation apps and stress relief, often leaving behind karma, rebirth, and superstition. What we see is not an unchanging truth, but selective editing for cultural appeal. Even the language religions use has evolved. Sermons once thundered with threats of damnation. Now many emphasize positivity, self-help, and community. Some churches sound less like centers of worship and more like motivational seminars. Words like sin and obedience are softened into mistakes and growth. This linguistic shift is strategic. It helps avoid the discomfort that comes with traditional dogma while still holding on to the brand of faith. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If religion can be reshaped endlessly to suit modern taste but remains at its core, is there truly an unchanging essence? Or is the essence simply the need to preserve institutions, no matter how inconsistent the message becomes? From a sociological perspective, what we're witnessing is religion functioning like a cultural fossil. It survives not because it provides unique truths, but because it adapts just enough to stay attached to identity, tradition, and community. People may reject strict doctrine, but still
attend religious holidays for family reasons, or still identify with a religion even if they disagree with most of its teachings. The institution persists, not because it is right, but because it has embedded itself into the social fabric. The digital age is accelerating this tension. Younger generations have grown up with information at their fingertips. They can read scripture online, compare interpretations, and fact-check claims instantly. They see the contradictions between what religious leaders say today and what was said a century ago. This makes blind obedience harder to maintain. To respond, many religious institutions shift toward a more casual, choose what you like spirituality, less rigid, more consumer friendly, but the price of this flexibility is authenticity. The more religion bends to cultural fashion, the more obvious it becomes that it is culture, not divinity, guiding its path. We also see a rise in spiritual but not religious identities. People adopt meditation, yoga, or vague notions of the universe while rejecting formal doctrines. Religious institutions respond by rebranding themselves as centers for spirituality, open to anyone, even those who doubt traditional dogma. But again, this is survival strategy. By blurring lines, religions hope to remain relevant. Political power also drives religious evolution. In countries where religion still influences government, leaders use faith as a tool of legitimacy. When democratic ideals grow stronger, religions suddenly emphasize freedom, equality, and compassion. When authoritarianism rises, the same religions shift back toward control, obedience, and hierarchy. The doctrine changes not because the divine revealed something new, but because power requires it. Take women's roles as an example. Ancient texts placed women under the authority of men. Yet in modern times, we see female priests, pastors, and religious scholars gaining ground. This is progress, but it didn't happen because scriptures demanded it. It happened because society pushed for equality, and religions adjusted to avoid collapse. When institutions lagged too far behind, people left them, forcing leaders to evolve or lose relevance. And here is where the deeper issue lies. If religions evolve only when pressured, then they are not leading moral progress. They are following it. The victories in human rights, equality, and freedom come from outside religion, while religious institutions eventually repackage those victories as if they had been supportive all along. This rewriting of history helps preserve the illusion of moral authority, but the timeline tells another story. Evolution, then, is not a sign of divine wisdom. It is evidence of human adaptation applied to institutions that resist change until they have no other choice. And in that sense, religions do evolve for the modern world, but only as much as survival demands. The modern world is testing religions in new ways that ancient doctrines never anticipated. Questions about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, climate change, and space exploration push far beyond the imagination of those who wrote sacred texts, yet religions attempt to provide answers, often retrofitting old passages into modern debates. Some claim scripture predicted technology, others insist that morality must guide science through faith, but these efforts reveal more about reinterpretation than revelation. Consider bioethics. Stem cell research, cloning, and assisted reproduction present dilemmas completely foreign to ancient societies. And instead of providing clarity, religions argue among themselves. Some claim life begins at conception, others argue differently, and still others adjust their stance based on cultural acceptance. What emerges is not unity or divine certainty, but a patchwork of opinions filtered through centuries of reinterpretation. Climate change offers another case. Many religious leaders now call environmental stewardship a sacred duty, quoting verses about caring for the earth. Yet those same texts were written by cultures that believed the earth was flat and centered around humans. The sudden concern for global warming is not divine foresight. It is adaptation to a scientific crisis that religions must acknowledge or risk irrelevance. Technology also forces a kind of reluctant evolution. With the internet, religious exclusivity is harder to maintain. A believer can now watch a debate between scientists and theologians on YouTube, read critical essays online, or compare holy texts across traditions with a single search. This democratization of information undermines authority. Religious institutions once thrived on controlling access to knowledge. Today, that monopoly is broken. Their response has been to adapt, launching podcasts, TikTok sermons, and live streams. But while the format evolves, the content struggles to keep pace. Psychologically, the cracks are showing. Studies reveal that younger generations raised with religion are more likely to walk away than previous ones. They cite hypocrisy, outdated views, and lack of evidence. And to address this, Religions rebrand themselves as open-minded, less dogmatic, and more focused on community than belief. But the pattern is consistent. Change happens only when leaving things unchanged threatens survival. Even funerals and rituals are evolving. Once strictly religious, these ceremonies increasingly incorporate secular music, personal storytelling, or symbolic gestures that have little to do with Scripture. Families want authenticity over dogma, and religious leaders accommodate, often allowing practices that would have been condemned in the past. Another sign of evolution forced by demand. It's worth noticing that some adaptations are not toward greater openness but greater extremism. In times of uncertainty, certain groups double down on rigid interpretations. They resist modernization by insisting on literal readings of Scripture, but even this is a form of evolution. It is a reaction to change, a strategy to preserve identity in a world where flexibility feels like surrender. So, whether liberalizing or hardening, religions evolve. Take education. In the past, religious schools taught Scripture as an unquestionable fact. Today, many blend it with science. Some promote intelligent design as a compromise between creationism and evolution. This hybrid teaching is not a sign of timeless truth, but of strategic adjustment, an attempt to hold on to old beliefs while conceding just enough to remain credible. Globalization complicates this further. In multicultural societies, religions cannot survive by demanding strict conformity. They adapt by emphasizing universal themes, love, compassion, justice, while downplaying the exclusivity of salvation or the literal threats of hell. A mosque, church, or temple in a diverse city will sound very different from the same institution in a rural, homogeneous community. The message evolves according to context. But there's a danger in this constant reshaping. At some point, the religion becomes unrecognizable from its original form. When Christianity embraces modern science, women leaders, and LGBTQ inclusion, how much remains of Paul's letters or the Gospel's warnings? When Buddhism is presented as mindfulness without karma or rebirth, is it still Buddhism or just psychology wrapped in exotic packaging? These questions reveal that evolution has limits. Beyond a certain point, the faith is not merely evolving, it is dissolving into something else entirely. The persistence of tradition complicates things. Festivals, rituals, and holidays carry cultural weight even when belief fades. Christmas is celebrated by millions with no reference to Christian doctrine. Diwali and Hanukkah retain social meaning even among the less devout. This creates the illusion of religious survival when in fact it is cultural inertia. Religion evolves by blending into culture even if the faith itself weakens. Some defenders argue that this flexibility proves religion's timeless value, that it can adapt without losing its essence, but that claim overlooks the obvious. If the essence is so malleable that it can mean anything depending on the century, then it is not a stable truth. It is a story constantly rewritten to match whatever humans already believe. In practice, religion is a mirror reflecting society back to itself, not a lamp lighting the way forward. So the question, are religions evolving for the modern world, has an answer that is both yes and no. Yes, they evolve endlessly, but not as a sign of divine wisdom. They evolve as survival strategies, concessions to progress they cannot stop. And no, they do not evolve in a way that makes them true, consistent, or reliable. Their evolution exposes their fragility, not their strength. The competition between religion and secular systems highlights just how much adaptation is necessary for survival. In areas like healthcare, education, and charity, religion once held a monopoly. If you wanted a hospital, a school, or support in times of crisis, the church or temple often provided it. Today, governments, NGOs, and secular organizations fill those roles more effectively and with fewer strings attached. To remain relevant, religions have had to shift focus, emphasizing community, identity, and emotional support rather than material necessity. This shift reveals something important. When religion no longer provides unique benefits, it rebrands itself as a lifestyle option, a way to find meaning or a sense of belonging. This mirrors how businesses adapt to changing markets. The core product might be outdated, but clever packaging and marketing keep it alive. Whether through wellness branding, motivational rhetoric, or the promise of community, religion evolves into a softer, more appealing version of itself. At the same time, secular institutions demonstrate that morality, compassion, and cooperation can thrive without divine backing. Human rights charters, scientific ethics boards, and democratic constitutions create frameworks for justice and fairness that far surpass ancient religious codes. Faced with this reality, religions increasingly claim they were always aligned with these values, yet history shows otherwise. The abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, racial equality, and LGBTQ rights were all resisted by mainstream religious authorities before being slowly absorbed once opposition became untenable. This pattern is not accidental. It is structural. Religions tied to ancient texts cannot lead moral progress because their foundations were written in times of inequality, ignorance, and superstition. Progress arises outside of religion from human reason and experience. Religion adapts after the fact, reinterpreting itself to avoid being abandoned. Evolution here is not leadership, it is damage control. Even within communities of faith, generational divides show how adaptation works. Older members may cling to traditional interpretations, while younger ones demand openness and reform. Institutions walk a tightrope, trying to keep both sides engaged. Too much rigidity, and they lose the youth. Too much flexibility, and they alienate the elders. This balancing act itself is evidence of ongoing evolution, but also of deep instability. Some institutions try to resolve this by splitting. We see denominations fracture over issues like marriage equality, women's ordination, or political alignment. Each new branch claims legitimacy, but in reality, these splits expose the inability of a supposedly divine truth to hold communities together. The constant fragmentation of religion over social issues reveals that its evolution is not smooth or guided. It is chaotic, reactive, and divided. Global migration further complicates things. When believers from different cultures meet, their practices clash. A religion in one region might forbid certain foods, while in another those foods are central to celebration. To adapt, institutions either downplay rigid rules or reinterpret them. What once was presented as universal suddenly becomes flexible, proving again that survival, not truth, drives change. And yet, despite all this adaptation, religions often resist acknowledging that their beliefs are human-made. They continue to frame evolution as rediscovery rather than reinvention. For example, when churches now embrace science, they claim faith and reason were never in conflict. When religious leaders support equality, they suggest it was always part of divine intention. These retroactive claims rewrite history to disguise the fact that change happened only under pressure. From a psychological angle, this denial is powerful. Believers prefer to see their tradition as consistent, even when the evidence shows constant shifts. Cognitive dissonance allows people to hold on to faith while ignoring contradictions. Institutions encourage this by presenting evolution as continuity, assuring followers that nothing essential has changed, but beneath the surface, everything has. Modern religions also compete not just with secular systems, but with each other. In the global marketplace of ideas, a faith that refuses to adapt risks being overshadowed by one that presents itself as more compassionate, more rational, or more culturally relevant. This competition accelerates evolution, pushing institutions to adopt progressive stances not out of conviction but out of necessity. And here lies the central irony. Religions claim timeless truth, yet their survival depends on constant revision. They insist on divine authority, yet adapt to human culture. They present themselves as leaders, yet follow the very trends they once condemned. The more they evolve, the more they reveal that their foundation was never divine, but always human. The question then is not whether religions are evolving for the modern world. They clearly are. The deeper question is whether that evolution makes them more valuable, or whether it exposes their irrelevance. Because if an institution must constantly reshape itself to mirror human progress, then it is not guiding humanity. It is simply struggling to keep up. Looking at global case studies makes this clearer. In Scandinavia, where secular governance and social trust are high, traditional churches have lost much of their influence. Yet instead of disappearing, many have rebranded as cultural institutions. They host concerts, community events, and seasonal rituals with little focus on doctrine. Religion evolves into heritage, more about identity than belief. It survives, but only in a hollowed out form. In the United States, the story is different. Religion competes aggressively in the public sphere, and churches often adapt by becoming more like entertainment venues. Services feature rock bands, LED screens, and motivational style sermons. The focus shifts from theology to personal empowerment. Yet the underlying contradictions remain. The Bible has not changed, only the performance around it has. In parts of Africa and South America, we see syncretism, blends of Christianity with indigenous traditions. Saints merge with local deities. Rituals mix with ancestral practices. This too is evolution, but it raises an uncomfortable question. If divine truth can be mixed, edited, and reshaped, then what makes one version more legitimate than another? The very act of blending reveals that religions are not fixed systems, but fluid cultural expressions. Meanwhile, in countries with strong authoritarian control, religion often adapts to serve power. Leaders claim divine approval, and religious institutions echo political narratives. In these cases, the evolution of religion is less about cultural openness and more about political utility. Ancient texts are selectively quoted to justify modern agendas. What was once spiritual guidance becomes propaganda. Across all these cases, a pattern repeats. Religion evolves, but the direction of evolution is dictated not by revelation, but by external forces, culture, politics, science, and survival. When society moves forward, religion lags, resists, and then eventually conforms. And when it does, it often tries to rewrite its own history, pretending it was always supportive. We can see this most clearly in how religions talk about human rights. Today, many claim to be champions of dignity, freedom, and equality. Yet the historical record shows otherwise. Scriptures justified slavery. Sermons defended segregation. Women were denied education, leadership, and independence. Now that society has rejected those positions, religions adopt the language of rights and compassion. But the timeline exposes the truth. They follow, they do not lead. This doesn't mean religion cannot comfort people. Many find meaning, ritual, and tradition valuable, but comfort does not equal truth. Nostalgia does not equal moral authority. When institutions evolve primarily to keep followers, we should recognize the difference between adaptation for survival and genuine guidance. Technology adds another dimension to this. Artificial intelligence and biotechnology present challenges that ancient texts cannot address. Already, religious leaders release statements on the ethics of AI or genetic editing, but these statements are not drawn from Scripture. They are borrowed from secular, ethical debates, then dressed in the religious language. Again, the adaptation is clear. Religion survives by echoing the insights of human progress. Even concepts of the afterlife evolve. Where once vivid depictions of heaven and hell dominated sermons, modern leaders often soften the imagery. They speak of eternal peace or being remembered with love rather than fire and torment. These changes are not revelations. They are updates designed to make doctrine less frightening, more palatable in an age where fear-driven obedience no longer works as effectively. The same is true with morality. Once rooted in rigid commandments, modern religious teaching now often frames morality in psychological or therapeutic terms. Instead of sin, we hear about brokenness. Instead of obedience, we hear about self-growth. This language shift is not theological discovery. It is adaptation to a culture shaped by psychology, humanism, and science. From a wider perspective, we could say that religions are evolving the way myths always have. Ancient stories of gods, heroes, and cosmic battles adapted to new empires, new languages, and new values. Religion is no different. What changes today is the speed of adaptation. In a world where information travels instantly, religions must evolve faster than ever just to maintain relevance.
But the faster they adapt, the more visible the contradictions become. A church that once condemned same-sex love now celebrates it. A temple that once restricted women now ordains them. A mosque that once rejected democracy now praises freedom. Each shift may feel like progress, but collectively they expose the illusion of timeless truth. So yes, religions are evolving for the modern world, but in doing so, they reveal that their essence is not divine revelation but cultural survival. They change not because gods demand it, but because humans do. And when the pressure of human progress is strong enough, even the most rigid institutions bend. One of the most fascinating parts of this evolution is how followers accept contradictions that on the surface should shatter belief. A religion that once insisted slavery was natural now claims it always stood for freedom. A church that condemned women's leadership now celebrates their ordination. These reversals should spark doubt. Instead, many believers embrace the changes without questioning why divine truth needed correction in the first place. Psychology helps explain this. Humans are wired for consistency, but when faced with contradictions, we often adjust our interpretations rather than abandon our framework. This is cognitive dissonance. When religious institutions shift, followers rationalize the change as deeper understanding rather than reversal. They convince themselves that truth was always there, simply hidden or misunderstood. In this way, adaptation becomes invisible to those inside the system. Religious leaders reinforce this by framing evolution as continuity. They say the spirit of the teaching has always been about love, justice, or compassion. The fact that past leaders applied it differently is portrayed as human error, not divine failure. This narrative protects institutions from collapse while allowing followers to stay loyal, but it also blurs the line between tradition and reinvention. This blurring is not accidental. It is necessary for survival. If believers admitted that religion has been wrong on core issues for centuries, the claim of divine authority would collapse. So adaptation is always framed as clarification, never correction. Yet history shows a clear pattern of reversal, not refinement. The morality that people now celebrate as religious values was usually adopted only after religion resisted it for generations. Why do people accept this? Because religion offers more than doctrine. It offers identity, belonging, and emotional comfort. To walk away means not just rejecting ideas, but leaving behind family traditions, community, and sometimes entire support networks. For many, it is easier to accept contradictions than to face that loss. Evolution within religion, no matter how inconsistent, allows people to stay without fully confronting doubt. This reveals a paradox. The more religion evolves to remain relevant, the more contradictions it creates. Yet those contradictions do not destroy the institution because followers adapt alongside it. The community redefines truth together, smoothing over gaps with stories, metaphors, and reinterpretations. What appears from the outside as inconsistency, from the inside feels like growth. Sociology reinforces this dynamic. Groups survive not by being perfectly consistent, but by maintaining cohesion. If evolving doctrine keeps people together, then consistency becomes less important than unity. This is why religions can reinvent themselves dramatically over time without mass collapse. The structure of community holds stronger than the accuracy of doctrine. But this also shows why religion cannot be the foundation of truth. A system that changes to maintain loyalty is not pursuing knowledge. It is preserving itself. Truth does not need to evolve when new evidence arises. It simply is. Only human systems must bend, reinterpret, and rewrite. And religion has always done exactly that. Consider how different generations within the same faith describe their beliefs. A grandparent may recall fire and brimstone sermons about sin and punishment. Their children may remember sermons about morality and responsibility. Their grandchildren may hear uplifting talks about love and acceptance. Each generation feels it is practicing the same religion, but the experience is entirely different. The faith evolves so smoothly that followers rarely see how much has changed. This evolution was not limited to doctrine. Rituals themselves shift over time.
What once required strict observance becomes optional. Dietary laws are relaxed, prayer practices shortened, fasts modified, festivals that once had deep theological meaning turn into cultural holidays centered on food, music, or family gatherings, and the shell of tradition survives while the substance transforms. And yet, even when rituals lose their original meaning, they retain emotional power. The festival may no longer be about honoring a deity, but it still binds community. So this emotional glue is one of the strongest tools religions have that allows them to evolve without breaking apart, because even as beliefs change, the rhythm of ritual remains. In this sense, religions evolve not just for the modern world, but for the human need to belong. Doctrines can shift, rituals can soften, but as long as people gather under the same symbols, the institution survives. The content matters less than the container. The evolution of religion is less about truth and more about maintaining the sense of continuity that people crave. The danger, however, is that this adaptation masks the erosion of credibility. From the outside, it becomes clear that religion follows society rather than leads it. From the inside, the illusion of divine guidance remains strong, but illusions cannot hold forever. As each new contradiction emerges, the cracks widen. The question is whether religions can keep evolving quickly enough to survive in a world where human progress moves faster than ever before. The pace of modern change puts religions on the defensive in ways that expose their limits. In the past, cultural shifts unfolded over centuries, giving institutions time to adjust gradually. Today, new challenges arise every decade, sometimes every year. Artificial intelligence, genetic modification, a digital privacy, climate collapse, space colonization, none of these issues can be addressed by ancient texts without heavy reinterpretation. The speed of change leaves religion scrambling, always behind, always catching up. Technology especially magnifies the problem. The internet has eroded the barriers that once protected sacred authority. A child can fact-check scripture in seconds, compare religious claims with scientific evidence, and watch debates that expose contradictions. This democratization of knowledge strips away the mystery that once surrounded religious leaders. Authority no longer comes automatically from a pulpit. It must compete with countless other voices online. Religions respond by moving into the digital space themselves. Live streams, podcasts, TikTok sermons, even virtual reality pilgrimages. The packaging evolves, but the content does not. Ancient ideas wrapped in modern media highlight the very tension religions hope to hide. They appear updated, yet their core claims remain tied to texts written before electricity, medicine, or democracy existed. The contrast grows harder to ignore. Globalization adds another layer. In multicultural societies, no single faith can claim dominance without confronting alternatives. Believers encounter neighbors who follow different traditions or none at all. This exposure weakens exclusivity. To adapt, religions often downplay absolute truth claims and emphasize universal values like compassion or justice, but this softening undermines their original claim of possessing the only path to truth. The more inclusive they become, the less distinct they appear. This creates a survival dilemma. If a religion resists change, it risks losing followers who find its rigidity outdated. If it adapts too much, it loses its identity and dissolves into vague spirituality. Many institutions try to walk the middle path, holding on to just enough tradition to seem authentic while softening enough to remain appealing. But this balancing act is fragile and increasingly transparent. Consider morality. Modern societies now legislate equality, human rights, and protections that go far beyond what any ancient scripture envisioned. When religious leaders endorse these principles, they do so after the fact, often generations late. By then, the moral authority has already shifted to secular systems. People begin to recognize that progress flows from human reasoning, not divine command. Religion evolves, but only as a shadow of the real forces driving change. The contrast becomes sharpest in moments of crisis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many religious leaders resisted scientific advice while others embraced it. Some claimed divine protection, others insisted on prayer over vaccines. Eventually, most adapted to scientific recommendations, but not without confusion and division and lost credibility. This revealed that religion does not guide society in emergencies. It reacts, fragments, and only later tries to align with reality. Even when religions embrace progress, the process reveals weakness. A church that suddenly supports women's leadership exposes centuries of exclusion. A mosque that encourages environmental stewardship highlights centuries of silence on global ecology. A temple that embraces LGBTQ equality betrays generations of condemnation. Adaptation may attract some, but it also reminds others of the long trail of resistance and harm. Sociologically, this puts religions in a strange position. They must appear both ancient and modern, timeless yet flexible, authoritative yet responsive. The contradiction is difficult to maintain under constant scrutiny. For every believer who welcomes adaptation, there is another who feels betrayed by it. Internal division grows, splintering institutions into conservative and progressive factions. Each claims to be authentic, yet their differences show how fluid truth really is. The more visible this becomes, the harder it is to defend the claim of divine revelation. If one branch of a faith can embrace evolution and democracy and human rights, while another condemns them as heresy, then what does that say about the supposed clarity of Scripture? The fact that interpretation can swing so widely proves that adaptation is human, not divine. This is the challenge of modernity. Secular ethics evolve through debate, evidence, and revision. Religion evolves through reinterpretation, denial, and eventual concession. One process seeks truth, the other seeks survival. The contrast is becoming harder for people to ignore, and this may be the most important point. Religions are evolving for the modern world, but not fast enough, and not in ways that keep their original claims intact. Every adaptation solves one problem, but creates another. Every concession keeps some followers, but drives others away. The very act of evolving exposes the gap between ancient authority and modern reality. As secular systems expand, the space once dominated by religion grows smaller. Education, healthcare, law, and welfare were once deeply tied to temples, churches, and mosques. Today, governments and non-religious organizations provide these services more effectively and usually with fewer exclusions. Schools teach science without scripture. Hospitals treat patients without demanding belief. Courts uphold rights without citing divine authority. Step by step, secular institutions have taken over the responsibilities that gave religion practical power. This shift forces religion into a different role. Since it can no longer monopolize basic services, it reinvents itself as a guardian of meaning, identity, and community. Sermons talk less about divine law and more about purpose, personal growth, or mental health. Sacred spaces market themselves as safe havens for belonging. The rhetoric adapts, but again, the adaptation highlights the underlying loss of influence. Charity provides another example. Religious groups long claim moral authority by providing aid, but as global organizations like Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, or secular NGOs expand, religious charities face competition. To remain visible, they reframe giving not just as compassion, but as obedience to God. Yet even here, the secular model proves stronger. It does not discriminate based on belief, and it draws legitimacy from human rights rather than divine command. Religion's adaptation is defensive, not pioneering. The same dynamic appears in ethics. Ancient codes once shaped law. Today, ethics committees, international courts, and human rights charters lead the way. When religious leaders speak about justice, they increasingly echo secular values, not scripture. They may quote holy texts, but the content aligns with standards set outside their tradition. In effect, religions have become translators, repackaging secular ethics in spiritual language to remain relevant. But this strategy has limits. If people recognize that compassion, justice, and equality thrive without religion, the claim of necessity collapses. And many do recognize it. This is why younger generations often identify as spiritual but not religious, or abandon religion altogether. They see that the moral and practical functions of religion have been replaced. What remains are rituals, identity, and nostalgia. that nostalgia is powerful. Holidays, symbols, and ceremonies carry emotional weight long after belief fades. Christmas lights, Ramadan meals, Diwali festivals, these can survive as cultural practices even when participants no longer hold the original faith. Religions evolve by leaning into this cultural side, downplaying doctrine to preserve relevance. But the cost is that they become indistinguishable from cultural traditions, losing their claim to divine authority. Another way religions adapt is by emphasizing personal spirituality. They shift focus away from dogma and toward individual experience. Prayer becomes meditation, worship becomes mindfulness, God becomes the universe or a higher power. This personalization makes faith harder to challenge since it is no longer tied to rigid claims, but it also dissolves religion into vague spirituality, weakening institutions even as it preserves personal belief. This trend reflects a deeper truth. The functions once exclusive to religion, moral guidance, social support, explanations of the world, are now provided elsewhere. Science explains nature. Psychology addresses the mind. Philosophy and law define ethics. Community is found online or in secular organizations. Religion evolves by narrowing its focus, but each adaptation is a reminder of what it has lost. Even within communities, we see this shift. Younger people often value diversity and inclusivity, pushing religious institutions to soften exclusivity, but the softer they become, the less they resemble their origins. A church that once declared outside our faith there is no salvation now preaches all paths lead to truth. A mosque that once emphasized obedience now emphasizes community. These changes may keep people engaged, but they hollow out the very doctrines that made the religion distinct. This is the paradox of adaptation. The more religion evolves for the modern world, the less it can claim divine authority. The more it bends, the clearer it becomes that the bending is done by human hands. It survives, but survival does not equal truth. It adapts, but adaptation is evidence of fragility, not strength. So when we ask whether religions are evolving for the modern world, the answer is clear. Yes, they are. But each step forward erodes the foundation they claim to stand on. What remains is not timeless revelation, but a cultural institution struggling to stay relevant in a world that no longer depends on it. Not all religions evolve by softening. Some adapt in the opposite direction by doubling down on rigidity. When faced with modern pressures, certain groups retreat into fundamentalism, insisting that every word of their scripture must be taken literally. This reaction may look like resistance to change, but it is also a form of evolution. It's a strategy for survival in a world that threatens to dissolve certainty. Fundamentalism thrives on fear of loss of identity, of tradition, of control. By presenting itself as unshakable, it offers stability in times of rapid change. But this is still adaptation, an adjustment to cultural anxiety. In earlier eras, religions did not need to call themselves fundamentalist because their authority was not in question. The very rise of fundamentalism proves that modernity forces religions to reinvent even their posture of resistance, and we see this in debates over evolution, gender roles, and sexuality. Some leaders reject all reinterpretation, declaring that compromise with modern values is betrayal. Yet even here, change is visible. Sermons are broadcast on YouTube. Scripture is defended with modern science-like rhetoric. Political lobbying is pursued to enshrine old rules and new laws. These are not ancient practices. They are modern tools used to maintain old beliefs. Fundamentalism, ironically, is one of the most modern forms of religion. This hardening also reveals the weakness of soft adaptation. Progressive branches may grow more inclusive, but they risk losing those who see flexibility as dilution. In response, conservative branches dig deeper trenches, appealing to those who crave certainty. The result is fragmentation, each group claiming authenticity, but all proving that religion is not fixed. It is splintered, constantly reshaped by competing pressures. History shows that this cycle is not new. Whenever societies modernize, some religious factions liberalize, while others radicalize. The Protestant Reformation split from Catholicism not just over corruption, but over interpretation. Today, we see similar fractures within Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and other traditions, and whether through fundamentalism or liberalization, the core fact remains the same. Religion adapts because it must. What makes the present era different is speed and visibility. In the past, a doctrinal shift could unfold over generations with little awareness among ordinary believers. Now changes are debated online in real time. A single viral video can expose contradictions, forcing leaders to respond instantly. Adaptation is no longer gradual, it is immediate, public, and often messy. Fundamentalism, then, is less a return to purity than a desperate strategy. It thrives by claiming to resist the modern world while relying on modern tools to spread its message. It evolves not by softening, but by intensifying. But the principle is the same: adaptation for survival. This brings us to a deeper insight. Every form of religious evolution, whether liberalizing or radicalizing, reveals that faith is not stable. It bends in whichever direction helps preserve loyalty and identity. Sometimes that means embracing inclusion. Sometimes it means retreating into dogma. Either way, the shift is guided not by divine revelation, but by human necessity. Sociologists describe this as reactive adaptation. Institutions respond to external forces rather than shaping them. Modern religions illustrate this perfectly. Whether adopting progressive values or resisting them, they are reacting to pressures they cannot control. Their survival depends not on divine truth, but on strategic flexibility. The irony is sharp. The very institutions that claim timelessness are the most visibly altered by time. The very doctrines said to be eternal are the ones constantly rewritten, softened, or enforced more harshly depending on circumstance. Religion evolves for the modern world, but in doing so, it confesses its humanity. And this raises the central question again. If a system must reinvent itself every generation to remain credible, can it still claim to be eternal? Or is it simply another human institution shaped by fear, hope, and culture, pretending to hold what it cannot? Credibility is the hidden cost of constant adaptation. When religions change too slowly, they risk appearing cruel or outdated. When they change too quickly, they appear inconsistent and opportunistic. Either way, the claim of divine authority weakens. If truth were eternal, it would not need revision every generation. Yet that is exactly what we see. For many, this erosion is subtle. Believers may not consciously notice contradictions because rituals and community mask them. But over time, each adjustment chips away at trust. If hell once meant eternal fire but now means separation from God, what will it mean in 50 years? If marriage was once defined strictly but is now redefined, what other teachings might shift? The ground beneath the believer quietly moves, even while leaders insist it has always been firm. This is why so many people, especially younger generations, view religion less as a system of truth and more as a cultural option, something you can adopt, reinterpret, or leave behind without losing your identity. Faith becomes one lifestyle choice among many, not the foundation of reality. The more religion evolves, the clearer it becomes that it is not absolute. In fact, evolution often reveals the human fingerprints on doctrine. When scripture is reinterpreted to support human rights, equality, or science, the improvement does not come from the text itself, but from the society demanding it. The text remains the same. What changes is our willingness to read it differently. This exposes the direction of influence. Religion does not shape society. Society shapes religion. As religions dissolve into culture, their role shifts. Instead of being a source of answers, they become vessels of tradition. Holidays, festivals, and rituals survive, but stripped of theological certainty. Christmas is about family gatherings, not divine incarnation. Diwali is about lights and joy, not cosmic battles. Ramadan is as much about communal iftars as about obedience. This cultural survival keeps institutions visible, but it empties them of their original claims. Some see this as a natural transition, just as Greek mythology became literature and Norse mythology became cultural heritage. Modern religions may one day be remembered primarily for their stories, art, and rituals rather than their doctrines. They evolve into memory rather than belief. Already, this process is underway in much of the developed world, yet institutions resist this fate. Leaders frame every adaptation as a deepening, not a softening. They insist that changes are proof of living tradition rather than evidence of weakness. But the illusion grows harder to sustain. With every reinterpretation, followers are reminded that what was once unchanging truth has changed and may change again. This instability also fuels polarization. Some believers welcome adaptation, seeing it as proof that their faith can stay relevant. Others resist fiercely, convinced that change is betrayal. The result is division within traditions, with progressive and conservative wings pulling in opposite directions. Far from proving timelessness, this fragmentation shows that religion is increasingly shaped by culture rather than by any unifying revelation. And in the global context, this fragmentation weakens religious authority. When different branches of the same faith contradict each other on basic questions, outsiders recognize the inconsistency. If one church blesses same-sex marriage and another condemns it as sin, which version reflects divine will? If one imam advocates democracy and another denounces it, where is the eternal truth? The more religions adapt in competing directions, the less credible the entire system becomes. At some point, this raises a fundamental choice. Do religions double down on claims of divine certainty, risking irrelevance as the world moves on? Or do they adapt endlessly, losing their identity as they dissolve into vague spirituality and cultural nostalgia? Either path is survival, but neither preserves the original claim of timeless truth. The question of whether religions are evolving for the modern world has only one answer. Yes, they are. But the cost of evolution is credibility. The very act of change proves that they are human institutions, bound by time, culture, and necessity. What survives may be comforting, beautiful, or socially useful, but it will no longer be what it once claimed to be. Secular systems now provide almost everything religion once promised, meaning morality and community can be found without divine authority. Philosophy, psychology, and science offer frameworks for understanding ourselves and the universe. Laws and human rights charters define justice more fairly than ancient commandments ever could. Communities form around shared interests, causes, or cultures, not just creeds. The vacuum religion once filled is being replaced piece by piece by institutions built on reason, evidence, and shared human values, meaning once tied to myths is now discovered through human creativity. Art, literature, and science expand our sense of wonder without invoking the supernatural. Morality, once tied to divine threats and rewards, now rests on empathy, fairness, and collective well-being. Community, once monopolized by religious gatherings, now thrives through secular organizations, cultural traditions, and even online spaces. In each case, religion adapts by rebranding itself as still essential, but the truth is that society has learned to live and often thrive without it. This doesn't mean religion vanishes overnight. Its rituals and traditions carry emotional weight too deep to dissolve instantly. People still marry in churches, celebrate holidays in temples, and bury loved ones with sacred words. But these practices often survive more as cultural habits than as expressions of belief. Religion evolves by leaning on its symbolic power while its doctrinal authority fades. For those who remain inside, this evolution is presented as growth, a sign that faith is alive and responsive. For those outside, it looks like compromise, an institution constantly shifting its ground to avoid collapse. The contrast is telling. What feels like timeless continuity from within is exposed as constant reinvention from without. The truth is simple, even if uncomfortable. Religions are evolving for the modern world, but evolution is not proof of divine wisdom. It is proof of human invention. They survive by adapting to pressures they cannot control, bending under the weight of human progress, and reshaping themselves to mirror the very societies they claim to guide. And in the process, their original claims grow thinner. The eternal truths turn out to be negotiable. The divine commands become optional. The timeless structures dissolve into culture, nostalgia, and ritual. What remains may still be meaningful to many, but it is no longer sacred in the way it was once presented. So the answer to the question is yes, religions do evolve for the modern world, but their evolution reveals what they truly are. Not eternal truths handed down from beyond, but human systems adjusting, surviving, and transforming as the world leaves them behind. And maybe that's the final stage of evolution for religion. Not disappearance, but transformation into something else entirely. Traditions, stories, festivals, communities, still present, still powerful, but no longer mistaken for divine revelation. In that sense, religion is indeed evolving, but not toward timeless truth. Rather, toward its inevitable place as just another part of human culture.